Welcome to the Bridge of Two podcast. So welcome to the Bridge of Two podcast, everyone.
Welcome.
We are glad to be back. We're glad to be welcoming on a guest with us that we had the pleasure of meeting when we were far, far away on our journey to Dragonsteel. We met Clay Harmon, and he's a author, and he shared with, I think Jeremiah met him first and shared about his book and had just a good kind of shortish conversation, but told him about the podcast and said,
yeah. It was a great conversation. That event was a lot of fun. Just being able to meet new people and talk with them was what made it so amazing. I had a ton of fun. Got to meet a lot of people. So yeah, it was great. Hope you guys had as much fun as I did.
Oh yeah, I had a great time.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, you definitely wrote me in talking about your book and the magic system, and then you sold me when you autographed it with a picture of your cat.
Oh yeah, that's usually I'll draw volcanoes or I'll draw one of my three cats. I've been drawing Clarence quite a bit lately. I need to kind of switch it up, maybe draw Bojangles or Huey, but yeah, maybe that's for next year, possibly. Sneak peek.
Is Clarence easier to draw?
No, I mean, I'm just such a terrible drawer that all of the cats end up kind of looking sort of the same. Yeah. But Clarence is my favorite, so he's the one I've been drawing lately.
Favorites of the cats?
Yeah, he's the one that I found in a dumpster, and so kind of nursed him back to health and all of that, and so he's kind of just been my baby. While the other one was raised by my wife for about a year before we met, and then Huey was the one. How we got Huey is, have you guys ever heard of a cat cafe before?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you pay $5 and you go into a room and you get to play with 40 cats for a half hour. And so that's what we did. And we've been there a few times, and it is very difficult not to walk out of that place without a cat. And so the first time we went, we ended up with Huey. And then the last two times we've gone, we've managed to resist the temptation, but we've been thinking about it. So I don't know how many cats you need to be considered a crazy cat owner, but I feel like we're reaching that point.
Yes, there were never too many cats. My
wife's family had 5 cats whenever we started dating. So that was interesting, but I guess that's not, I mean, I know people get lots more cats than that, but
yeah, I mean, I need the cats, working remote these days, being stuck in my house. Most of the time it's nice having some company. And so half the time it's my wife yelling at our cats because they won't shut up sometimes, but it's nice bringing that energy into the house. Yeah.
One cat is still young and gets everywhere and runs around all over the place and destroys everything.
Wasn't Kyrie a similar story? Wasn't Kyrie a rescue? Someone didn't our in-laws save
our sister-in-law. We're related as well. He's my
brother-in-laws.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
But our sister-in-law and her family found Kyrie under a car over at a restaurant in the rain.
Oh wow.
Kitten and crying, all that, and they already have 3 kittens and some chickens, and so they called up my wife and we heard you want another cat. You want this one? And
nice.
History.
So if you guys are brother-in-laws, it must be nice that when you guys met, you found out they had a mutual love for science fiction and fantasy books.
Yes, we did. Yeah. Actually, he's the one who really pushed me to get into Brandon Sanderson. I was actually already watching Brandon Sanderson's lectures on writing at that point.
Oh, nice.
Because I'm aspiring author, and so, but I hadn't read any of his books, and I knew I needed to. And then he was like, "You got to read Way of Kings." You were blasting through it at that point.
Yeah, because I think when I started it, my girlfriend at the time went on a trip to Europe, and so I had a week and a half to myself, and ended up finishing Way of Kings in that week. It was so good.
Wow. Wow. That's how I kind of, not through Brandon Sanderson specifically, but that's how I met one of my closest friends. My wife and I took a trip. This was when we were living in California. We took a trip to the coast where one of her friends was living, and she had a boyfriend. Her friend had a boyfriend. And when we got there, I was kind of meeting him, and he kind of like seemed like such a bro. And that's don't judge a book by its cover. But when I first met him, I was like, am I going to get along with this guy? Tend to not really have much in common with dude bros. And then I look over in the living room, and he's got this massive shelf just full of fantasy books. And I'm like, oh, so you're a reader? And he's like, yeah, I'm a reader. And we ended up bonding over Brian McClellan. And then, and then I told him that I was a writer. This was right before I ended up signing with my agent. And so I was kind of explaining that whole journey to him. And he asked to read the book that I was working with Joshua on, and I sent it to him, and we just became buds after that. It was great. And so I feel really lucky that I found someone that loves, that genre as much as I do, because I feel like most of the time when I meet new people, they tend to not be big readers, which always makes me, a little bit sad.
Yeah. Right. Was such a big, it's like such a big part of whenever you are a big science fiction fantasy person, such a big part of like how you relate to the world. And I mean, I think it just affects the way you like just view the world too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like not being able to like connect that with someone else, it's always harder to feel like you can really articulate like who you are.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel very fortunate that I live in Utah, because the sci-fi fantasy scene here is absolutely enormous. I moved here from Fresno, California, and I worked at the Barnes and Noble there. And Fresno and the city next to it, Clovis, which are kind of basically one giant city. There's like, I don't know, 1 million or so people, and there was one Barnes and Noble and a couple of independent bookstores. But then when I moved to Utah, the Salt Lake metropolitan area has probably a couple million, maybe less. So it's a little bit bigger than where I came from. And there are like 8 or 9 Barnes and Nobles that are within driving distance of where I'm at, and a bunch of independent bookstores as well. And so the reading population here is huge, and science fiction, fantasy in particular. Everyone here loves Brandon Sanderson. Yep. No surprise there. So it's been pretty awesome being part of it.
Yeah, I noticed when I was down there with my wife, when we were all down there for Dragonsteel, my wife and I were there a little bit early and stayed a little bit later because we made a vacation out of it. Mm-hmm. We went and actually checked out that Legendarium bookstore.
I actually have not been to that one.
It blew me away because it was a small little bookstore out of a little coffee shop, and it was all sci-fi fantasy. There was no other genre.
Okay, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I want to check it out, because there's one independent bookstore called King's English that I've been to that I really like. It's pretty small though. And then there are independent bookstores here and there that I've been to, which I wasn't, in love with. And then there was this place called Deseret Books, which is kind of more of a religious bookstore. And so I haven't really been to that one, but I've been looking for like an independent bookstore to check out that I love as much as like Barnes and Noble or King's English. So what would you say, Legendarium?
It's a Legendarium. Yeah, it definitely blew me away when I walked in, because like I said, I was expecting like a local bookstore, with different books and all that. Most local bookstores that we have around us and here in Daytona are just, if they have a fantasy section, it's very small. So it was nice to walk into one that was like devoted to sci-fi fantasy. It seems like they have a big D&D community there.
Oh, really? And you said there's like a cafe there too?
It's small, but it's a small little where you can get coffee and stuff like that. They had places you could sit down.
Yeah,
it's a small bookstore. Like it's almost like a house.
Clay, you have a twinkle in your eye.
Yeah, no, that's just because I hate writing when I'm at home, and I love writing in coffee shops. And if there's books in those coffee shops, that sounds right up my alley. So usually what I'll do is I'll go to write at a coffee shop, and I'll go there, for a couple of months, and then I'll kind of get sick of it. Usually, like if I go somewhere too many times, I will start just kind of not taking it as seriously. I'll just kind of start screwing around, browsing on the internet. And then once I go to like a new location, then I'll kind of get focused again, because I'm like in a new environment. And so I'm always on the lookout for a new place to write at. So I'm excited now.
Definitely check it out. The owner was super nice. So
yeah.
Nice.
So you're a writer as well, Josh?
Yes, I am.
How long have you been a writer for?
So I kind of I was interested to talk to you a little bit about something I saw. I listened to a little bit of the podcast that you were on before Dragonsteel. Um,
Okay, yeah,
the
with Tracy.
Yes, yes,
Yeah. I forget the name of the podcast, but yeah,
called Functional Nerds, I think, right?
Functional Nerds. Yeah,
Yeah. So shout out to Functional Nerds. If you want to hear more from Clay, he was on that podcast. But I mean, I started writing when I was in middle school on Lord of the Rings message boards. There were that like this is really like
Is
where
this fan fiction? Were you writing fan fiction?
well, it's kind of fan fiction, but it's like role playing because you create a character, you create a backstory, and then you like get together with this group of people and you basically talk about what's the story going to be, and then you write from your character's perspective, and then someone jumps on. So it's like a they make you make your message board post, and then they make theirs, and then go on, and you could have 3 people, 4 people, 5 people. So you could have 3 perspectives, 4 perspectives, 5 perspectives, all telling the same story.
this forum you're on, was it Envision Free? Was that the domain of
No,
the?
no, it was Council of Elrond. Have you?
No, I mean like because
Oh,
the Star Wars site that I was on, because it sounds just like what you're describing. It was called Star Wars Dominion, but
okay.
the hoster, the thing that hosted the forum was called Envision Free. Envision Free was just like a service
Okay.
that that's kind of how I was able to find different forums, was
Uh,
that I would kind of look through like the Envision Free like directory. Um,
oh.
and that's how I found Star Wars Dominion. And so, and I know those were Envision Free was a really popular service probably in like the mid 2000s, because that's when I was doing it, was like from 2004 to 2006, I would say, roughly.
I I did some Star Wars fan fiction too, so I may have been on some of the similar. I may have been, surfing through some of the similar stuff pages you were because
Yeah.
I didn't do as much Star Wars, like that kind of writing with Star Wars, but I did do some. And is that what you did? The kind of round robin thing?
Yeah. No, I say fan fiction just because it's kind of easier that way. But it was role playing where you'd make your
Yeah.
Star Wars character, and then you would, like, in the off topic section, you would look for someone to start a thread with, and then you'd start it, and then other people would jump in, and you'd kind of just follow the story wherever it went, and then just wait for it to conclude. And oftentimes, like, your power was often associated with like the number of posts that you had on the forum. And so someone like one of the system administrators, they would have 5 to 10,000 posts, and so they tended to be the more powerful characters. And then the if you had like less than 100 posts, you tended to be like an apprentice or something like that. So that's kind of how you gained power over time, as you were just more active on the site.
Power levels over 10,000.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I definitely, that was a highlight of that part of my life, was being able to do that and just kind of discover my creative side. It was a lot of fun.
Are these sites still things? Like, do people still do this?
I couldn't tell you. I mean, yeah, sure. I feel like that type of writing has grown more popular over the years. And so I would imagine that kind of stuff is out there, but I've been not part of it for a really long time.
There was a website. There is. I mean, I'm sure it's still active. There's a website called Forge Fiction that is like, that's the whole thing. It's a round robin storytelling, and then they like rank the stories, like people vote on them, and then like so it's a good system for feedback and seeing like good stories rise to the top and things like that. I think they actually like a book was published through that platform, through like a co-writing kind of situation. But that's actually, the Forge Fiction is the progenitor of this app that I've been writing for.
Okay.
But anyway,
Okay.
but yeah, so well, I just want to keep talking because this is fun to like reminisce a little bit.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You're getting like all the good feelings associated with like you get to create a character, so you're doing a little bit of world building, you're doing their backstory, you're making your character really cool, and then you're telling that story, but then you're also getting the satisfaction of coming back to that thread, and you're reading, there's like new stuff for you to read, you know what I mean? So it's like, I'm reading this story, I'm writing this story, I'm reading this story, so it's just, I tried to go back, like when I was in high school, and then even like maybe early on in college, I tried to go back and like try to get another one going. My problem was I just couldn't stick with it. I would like get busy, I'd forget to go back, I wouldn't be as devoted, and so I kind of like, that's where my writing kind of like there was like a pause in my writing journey or whatever there, because I started to date, get married, have kids, or, well, I don't know if I had Ellie yet, but yeah, when I was 25, when I was graduated from college, then I had like this spark of a story, and I was just like, I have to tell, like, I just had to write this story. There were some like things going on in my life, like some kind of like hard things, a family member that was going through a pretty deep thing with depression, things like that. And it just kind of like some things crystallized in me that I needed to explore in a story. And I'm still exploring. I'm still trying to write that book. I've done different iterations and versions of it, but still working on it.
Yeah, I mean, writing is definitely a great avenue for like self-fulfillment. I know that when I have like a really good writing session, how I feel is just completely different compared to how I feel like the rest of the day. And especially if there's stuff that I'm going through, being able to cope with all of that stuff just by writing has been something that has been a strategy of mine, since I started writing. It's been great. So I definitely know where you're coming from with that. So is it just the one novel that you've been working on so far?
Yeah, so mainly the one novel. I was like almost done with a draft of it, and then I actually had this short story that's written in the same world, that I had entered in a contest a couple of years ago, and it did well in the contest, and it was like put into an anthology, but then like immediately, it was like a small publisher. Immediately, the publisher went out of business, like right after they published the anthology.
That's too bad.
It was probably because of how bad my story was. No, but but it was like during the pandemic when they closed down. So, but so then so there was like, I made sure that like that story was the rights reverted back to me, and this like serialized reading app. It's kind of like Vella, Kindle Vella.
Mm-hmm.
Only it's its own independent thing. I started seeing ads for it, and I submitted a story to them, and they're publishing that. So I have this like serialized story now that I'm working on. So that manuscript I was working on kind of got put in the back burner, and I've been fleshing out and continuing that short story because it's because they do like seasons, and they want it's supposed to just kind of go on for as long as they want you to, and it will, but it's not out on the app yet, but it's going to be hopefully before the end of the year.
Okay. Gotcha. Did you say you have kids? Did I hear that?
Yes.
Okay. So how is that? Because I'm really worried that if I were to ever have kids, that my writing time would just completely disappear and would not reappear for like 18 years approximately. I know there are plenty of writers out there that have kids and whatnot and are able to balance it, but that's always just kind of something that sits in the back of my mind as a worry potentially.
It's hard doing a full-time job. I have a full-time, so it's hard having a full-time job and balancing full-time job, kids, obviously spending time with my wife, and then wanting to write. Like I want to write a lot more than I write. I do. That's been a journey to learn how to be intentional about making that a part of my schedule. And, my wife's very supportive, but it's really more about me and my headspace. It's hard for me to disconnect from the feeling of responsibility, and get into that headspace of writing. So, but I do write. Like, I have every Saturday morning I go early in the morning, like between 6 and 7 in the morning, and write for like 2-3 hours every Saturday, and then I try to write 2 nights a week for a couple hours. So the goal would be to be full-time author, right? And that would like change a whole change, because then my work time would be writing time, and that would not be as hard on the family, or not be as hard for me to be okay with spending that much time writing, because it'd be time I would have spent working.
Yeah, I'm pretty conflicted on the whole concept of being a full-time writer, because when I graduated college, I worked at Starbucks, and I quit my job at Starbucks because they wanted me to get more serious with it, and I didn't want to. I felt like if I, took that first step, I would end up following it, and I didn't want, my future to be there. So I ended up leaving Starbucks right at the same time I graduated. And so there was this like 3-month period where I was just kind of job hunting and not working and not going to school. And I would write, full time, quote unquote. And I loved it for like a week. And then I just completely hated it after that, because I would write at, I'd start around 8 in the morning, and then I would finish around 11 o'clock or so. And I was just mentally exhausted. I couldn't write any more than that. And then I would just not do anything for the rest of the day. I would do like job hunting stuff and whatnot, but there was just so much downtime, and I just couldn't do it. And so I ended up, getting my first, adult job, I guess, a couple months after that. And so I was able to find this balance of working full time and then writing for a couple of hours, after work. And I feel like that is still a little too much. I feel like the sweet spot would be working like part-time, so that you would have like a stable income that gets you out of the house on a consistent basis, but then also having, enough time for your wife, and then having, being able to write and whatnot. I feel like that would be the optimal situation for me.
I would take that, I would take that. I've actually thought about that. It's like, getting to a place where I could go part-time somewhere, not necessarily, because like most people don't become Brandon Sanderson writers.
Yeah. Like 99% of people. It's even just being able to make enough money writing to be able to do it full time is very hard. I mean, most of the people, you go into, any bookstore, Barnes and Noble, and you look at all the authors there, and the vast majority of them are probably still working or have other sources of income. I hear, once you get traditionally published and you're able to publish, multiple books, and you're getting royalties for multiple books and can continue to keep publishing, that's when you might be able to make enough money. But, it's not, you can, do the full-time thing as soon as you get your first book published. It definitely takes a long time after
quit
that.
Your job, quit everything. Jeremiah, stories in you, don't you?
Maybe a few.
Yeah. I'm trying. Jeremiah and I are trying to like world build a little bit and see if we can come up with a story for some format.
I've got stories in my head, but I am massively illiterate.
Not illiterate. You're very literate.
I don't know the best way to write them down. I tend to fall more into the visual arts field, drawing, painting, stuff like that. So I've, for the most part, with my stories, I've kind of made characters in my head and then drawn characters.
Okay. I feel like, having multiple people working on like a world and doing world building, that sounds like it'd be a lot of fun potentially. Because I feel like if I were to, say, co-write a story, there would just be too much butting heads of where I would want the story to go and my style of storytelling. But I feel like world building is a lot more, there's just so much more you can include without it necessarily conflicting with itself, that it could be a lot of fun to do that with someone, I imagine.
We're having fun with it so far. We've got a little Google Docs set up, and we just throw in random ideas as of right now.
So are you doing world building with him, and then he would write the story, or are you considering writing part of the story? You're just having fun with it.
About that, just doing world building more. Start off as there's a cat.
There's a cat. Oh,
nice.
I hope nothing.
I was wondering which of our cats would make an appearance first. It seemed like yours was the one.
She's hungry. This one's name is Syl.
Oh, Syl.
Short for Sylphrena. Stormlight.
Oh, nice. I actually have not read Rhythm of War yet.
Let's spoil it for you right now. Just kidding.
So because me and Brandon, we have the same literary agent, and when my book sold to my publisher, and we were negotiating the contract, it ended up taking like 14 months for negotiations, and I think my agent kind of felt bad, and so as like a consolation prize, he emailed me one day. He's like, "Hey Clay, do you want an advanced copy of Rhythm of War?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, I'll take a copy. I haven't cracked it open yet, and I've obviously had it for a while because I've had it since like a month before the book came out. But it was a nice little gift that I got that I'll get to eventually.
It's good. I like it.
Yeah, yeah. It's just such a commitment to read a book like that. What with all of the previous Stormlight books, I had taken an average of like a year to read them. I would read part of it, set it down, 3 months later, pick it up, and just do that over and over again. I tend to do that a lot with my books, where I'll read part of it and then I'll have no problem setting it down for like a year or more and then picking it back up again and finishing it. So I'll end up reading, a bunch of books at the same time. I don't usually have an issue with like remembering things. I can usually pick it back up pretty quickly. But yeah, usually if someone recommends a book to me and I'll read it, and they'll ask me about it, I'll be like, "Yeah, it's really good. I like it a lot." And they'll be like, "Oh, well, you finished it?" And I'm like, "No, I haven't. I stopped, at the 30% mark about 6 weeks ago, and I haven't gotten around to it again." They tend to not believe me that I like it, but even for stuff that I enjoy, I'll tend to do that, and I do that with like TV shows as well. I'll just do part of it and then set it aside for however long. I don't know why. That's just kind of how I've always been.
If I start something and I stop it,
you don't come back.
I'll come back, but when I come back, I have to start over.
Oh yeah.
Not because I necessarily forget anything, but because I'm worried that I forgot something.
Mm-hmm.
I used to read, like, I used to start so many books and not finish them. I was like, when I picked up Brandon Sanderson, I actually, I was in a big reading lull. Like I hadn't read, through a whole book like in a long time at that point. And I just committed to I'm going to stop reading like all these other books that I'm reading. I'm just going to ignore them and just going to read this one book and just stick with it. And that kind of got me back to where I was reading more consistently. But I've done that before. Like Elantris, I've read Brandon's book Elantris, his first published book, and that took me a long time to get through because it was like my mowing book, so I would like only listen to it when I mowed. And I think one of the Mistborn books I kind of took a while to get through as well. But anyway,
yeah, I think the first time I picked up one of Sanderson's book was because I don't know how familiar you guys are with the whole publishing process, but usually the first big hurdle is signing with a literary agent. And so when I was working with Joshua before I signed with him, I would send my parts of my book to him and he would give feedback and get back to me. And one of those times he recommended that I read Mistborn. And so that's how I started reading Brandon Sanderson's book. Was Joshua, our agent, would give me, like tips for how to improve my writing in specific ways. Like he would talk about how well Brandon Sanderson does like fight scenes and then the world building as well. And so he would call out specific things with the book. And so I remember one time when we were talking, I had read the first two books of Mistborn, and Joshua was so sad when he found out that I hadn't gotten around to reading the third book yet, because I had read the first two, pretty quickly, because of his suggestion, and then I just hadn't gotten to the third one because I didn't love the second one.
Yeah.
And then and just because of how sad he was, I was like, oh, okay, I'll read the third one. And I feel like even to this day, the third book is my favorite ending to any series I've ever read. Just how it all came together, just completely, it shook me. It was just so good. And so, yeah. And so the only other Sanderson books I've read are the Stormlight Archive books minus Rhythm of War. I really liked Way of Kings, and I liked the two that came after. They just feel like such a commitment. And the thing is that when you're a published writer, I don't, maybe I should just speak for myself on this, but there's kind of this underlying guilt where you want to stay up to date with what's coming out, because when you're trying to break in, a common piece of feedback you'll get is to read what's on the market so you understand what is being sold. And so I would feel a little guilty, reading a Sanderson book, because I'd feel like I could be reading, 5 other books at the same time that are being released at, right now. And so that's kind of one of the reasons that I would put it off. And that's why I tend to not, I've kind of gotten over it. I pleasure read a lot more now. I'll reread books that I really liked, which I wasn't doing very much, a few years ago. So it's kind of helped me kind of rediscover my love for reading, because it felt like research for the longest time. Mm-hmm. And so I felt like I was just reading books that I had to read instead of books that I wanted to read.
Yeah. I feel like I've felt pressure to like expand, because I've always been very I don't have a really broad, like I read Lord of the Rings and loved Lord of the Rings, and like reread Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion. Like I've read so much of like Tolkien's like other stuff, and like his expanded stuff for his world. Mm-hmm. Like all the posthumously published things I've own all those and things. And then I've read like Harry Potter, the whole Harry Potter, series. And then I've read Brandon Sanderson. I mean, I've read some Star Wars books too. I read, but other than that, like I haven't read like a lot of these like really, I haven't read, Wheel of Time and, a lot of these like iconic series, fantasy series, or even like up and coming ones. So I have felt a little bit like, is this gonna, at some point, am I gonna have to just like start doing that? Because if I don't, I'm gonna be just floating out there in my own little world of what I'm actually writing and all that.
Have you read Stephen King's On Writing?
I've not. I've read a lot of writing books, but I have not read that one.
There's a bit of advice. You might have heard this before, but the tip that he gives all writers is to read, and write. And I feel like the fact that I wrote as often as I did was invaluable for my growth, but then also reading as much as I did was invaluable for my growth too. Because there was a while where I was just kind of reading the super popular books, and I would just be rereading the same stuff that I really liked. And I feel like my growth as a writer didn't really take off until I was reading just all over the place and just kind of reading what was current, even if I didn't necessarily want to write like the stuff I was reading. Just kind of just being more aware of what was out there, I feel like helped me a lot. So yeah, I mean, I would recommend it if you wanted to get like really serious about writing. I don't know how absolutely necessary it is. I just know that it helped me a ton. So it could be worth it. I don't know. There's a lot of books out there that are being published that don't really catch my eye. And so sometimes it feels like a bit of like I mentioned, kind of research to have to force myself to buy it and then read it. And then oftentimes I don't enjoy it. I feel like I have very particular tastes with my reading. So I can understand the not wanting to do that, because I feel like I would say most of the time when I read a book, I don't love it. And it's very rare. I feel like a big part of that too is that when you're a writer for long enough, you tend to overanalyze everything that you're reading. And so kind of just forgetting that you're reading another writer's work is really hard sometimes for me. And I feel like that's kind of a major contributor to why I don't enjoy reading as much as I used to before I became a writer. It's a really amazing thing if I can find a book that just makes me completely forget that whole, writing aspect of my brain. Yeah.
I'm definitely not that. Like I am serious about it, but I don't know that I'm that deep. Like it's that deep of the thought process. Like I do notice things and like sometimes try to think about, okay, what are they doing here and how are they, okay, he just made a promise, so there's going to be a payoff for that at some point. But
yeah, I mean, I've been writing seriously for I don't know, 12, 13 years. And because I've been writing it seriously for that long, it's just been so internalized at this point that I can't help but analyze everything that I read. I feel like, earlier in it, I was able to kind of turn that off more easily. But at this point, it's just kind of so ingrained in me. It's really hard to not read that way.
That's kind of why I don't want to get into writing. I like reading. I'm a big reader, and luckily for me, my job is pretty conducive to having free time. I work on an ambulance, so when we're not running a call, I can do what I want for the most part.
Yeah.
And so I have a lot of free time to read when I'm not doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
I get through books pretty quickly. And it's reading is honestly my favorite one of my favorite things to do as a pastime. And so and I like being able to read it and not have to worry about. You heard the other pet. Not worry about. I just kind of shut my brain off and read the story. I'm big into stories and getting new stories and world building and learning new things and magic systems, stuff like that.
Yeah, that's kind of it. It kind of reminds me of this disconnect that I've been kind of becoming more aware of, where you kind of see it in the film industry, where like Rotten Tomatoes, for instance, you'll see like the critic score and then the audience score, and oftentimes you'll see huge discrepancies between the two scores. And a movie that might have really high critic score might have a really low audience score, and you can kind of understand that it's that way because these critics, it's their job to watch movies all day, every day. And so when you see that many movies, you tend to crave what's different and what's fresh more than like the casual viewer. And so if something is really, out there or weird and risky or whatever, a critic, will see that and be like, oh, finally something I haven't seen before. Whereas a casual viewer will kind of just be completely disconnected from that and will relate more to the things that have proven to work because they work. And so that's kind of how to relate that with the whole publishing thing. Is that's something I've been trying to deal with, where as a writer, I want to write stories that are interesting to me. And because I've read as much as I have, or I've been exposed to as much of the publishing world as I have, I'm maybe trying a little too hard to be different from what's out there. And I feel like that's and oftentimes publishers are looking a little too hard for what's different from what's out there. And so there'll be these books where I'll see it and I'll be like, that nothing about it really sticks out to me as being unique, but you'll see, it being universally loved by all of these readers. And I have to remind myself that it's okay to write something that isn't, super weird, super different, because that's, the average reader isn't going to connect with that, if that makes sense. It's kind of how, like with Wheel of Time, I forced myself to read Wheel of Time finally, last year, because I felt like I was, committing a sin or something by not, being a fantasy writer and not having read it. And I read it and I was like, this is the most cliche, overdone story I've ever read before. And I mean, the book did come out in the 90s, and so that type of story was probably a lot fresher back then. You know, with the caveat of, you know, Wheel of Time, at least the first book was kind of, you know, Lord of the Rings fan fiction. But yeah, like I'm saying, those types of stories can appeal to the casual reader, and I shouldn't get so hung up on trying to stand out, because casual readers aren't necessarily looking for that and won't connect with it. So yeah, that's my little spiel on something that I've been thinking a lot lately.
I mean, I can say as a casual reader that I just like a good story.
Yeah.
I can, like, Wheel of Time as an example, or another one for me was The Sword of Shannara by Terry Brooks.
Mm-hmm.
You can definitely see that they're heavily influenced by like Lord of the Rings, and so
Yeah,
you can spot those similarities or that, but they're also good stories and they're enjoyable to read. And you know, as a casual reader, for me, is I just enjoy reading them. You know, I've always enjoyed the characters and the world building and stuff like that. So
yeah, especially on like the prose level. There will be certain stories that are really well regarded, and I'll open it and I'll look at the prose and I'll think to myself, these sentences, I just can't really connect with them at all. I feel like they're not written that well. But then, or it'll even be a story that I remember really loving and enjoying before I was a writer, and then I'll look at it again and I'll be like, "There's so much about this I'm that I don't like. I'm surprised I liked it," and then I have to remind myself that that stuff is completely invisible most of the time to people who aren't writers, and so yeah, being able to balance that as a writer is hard for sure.
See, yeah, it seems like you know, just your casual most most readers are pretty forgiving, you know.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Especially like there's like big things you've got to get right. You know, you've got to make sure like your promises, you know, have satisfying payoffs, you know. So it's like if it's, you know, somewhat, if it's like a quest fantasy, you know, as long as you do the quest fantasy good, I mean, people generally will still enjoy those
Mm-hmm.
really well.
Yeah.
My brother-in-law is like a huge reader. Different brother-in-law is a big reader, and my sister's husband, and he reads like lots of self-published stuff that has tons of entries, like, and they're like short, and there's tons of them, and they're like, I don't know how they're doing, and they're seem to be doing well enough to have like audiobooks and stuff, because he mainly listens to audiobooks. But he'll tell me about some of the stuff, you know, and it's mostly sci-fi, and he'll tell me about it. It's like, this just sounds like your standard like sci-fi stuff, you know, and he even like won't love it all the time, but he'll still he'll still get through all of it, you know. So it doesn't have to be like groundbreaking all the time necessarily for people to read your story, you know.
Yeah, for sure. It seems like people prefer a really great story with average writing versus, you know, an average story with really great writing. I feel like when I first started writing, and I was trying to get better, I feel like I was just so focused on writing really good sentences that I didn't realize that there was a whole nother component to this whole thing, which was, you know, properly, you know, structuring a story, you know, doing like your status quo and your inciting incident, and your rising action and your climax and your resolution, and just structuring it in a certain way that would appeal to a reader. I was just too focused on like the minutia of like this specific scene, you know, I want it to sound really good from start to finish. And so that once I kind of made that connection that, you know, prose writing and storytelling are two completely separate skills. It helped me identify my weaknesses a lot more easily, and do what I had to kind of to fix that. And I'm obviously still learning. When people think that once you become a published author, you know, that's it. You've kind of plateaued at that point. But you talk to lots of writers or authors, I mean, that have published multiple books, and they'll often say that they hate, you know, opening the first book that they published, because it just read so poorly to them. And so I feel like I'm kind of going through that same thing right now, where not only am I growing as a writer, but my tastes are changing considerably. So like the thing that I'm working on right now is completely different from my debut, Flames of Mira. And so it's kind of it's been really refreshing to write, something different. And it's interesting to see how my tastes and my writing style has kind of evolved over time.
Awesome. Well, should we talk a little bit about Flames of Mira? We haven't I haven't read that much of it. I've read chapter 1 and some of chapter 2 just this week, and then Jeremiah's read a lot more. He's finished part 1.
Okay, awesome.
I think Jeremiah had some questions about like some stuff in it.
Well, just first off, so Flames of Mira is your first published work.
Mm-hmm.
Have you written other stories?
Yeah, that was my 5th or 6th book that I've written. Yeah, because I mentioned that I had been writing seriously for like 12 or 13 years. I started my first book when I was my second semester of college, with the intention of getting traditionally published before I turned 20. And I'm 31 now, and Flames of Mira came out this last summer. So I missed the mark on that one. But yeah, I wrote one book, and then I wrote a sequel to it. And then this was all young adult, by the way. I started out as a young adult writer because I really liked Harry Potter. And so I kind of wanted to write for that age group. Mm-hmm. So I wrote one book, I wrote the sequel, and then I wrote a third book that was a horror book. And then I wrote another book, which was kind of like a Maze Runner knockoff. And then I just wasn't able to get anything published. And then I was like, I need to switch this up. Maybe I shouldn't be writing an adult, because I noticed that what I was writing was very different from what was being published. And then I just kind of decided that I wasn't very good at writing an adult. And so I switched to writing just adult fantasy. And so Flames of Mira was my first adult fantasy book that I ended up writing. And so, yeah, it's my 5th or 6th or something like that.
So this is something I've been curious about, because really what hooked me when you were telling me about it when we met at Dragonsteel was the magic system. What was your inspiration for it, or like what really made you think up that magic system? Because it's very interesting.
Well, one thing is that when I first started going to college, I wanted to be an engineer. And then I, just discovered my love for writing and realized that, following a writing career and being an engineer, I can't really do both of those things and have enough time to sleep or have a life. And so I ended up switching from engineering to business, but I never kind of lost that interest in science. And so that was kind of one of the things. And then at the time when I was kind of coming up with the concepts for Flames of Mira, I liked the idea of there always being an explanation for how everything works. And so I didn't want to kind of just hand wave a magic system and be like, oh, this happens because of magic. I wanted to have an actual explanation for how it works, which is, the actual, elements of the periodic table, because that makes up, literally everything. And so, yeah, that's kind of just where I went with that. It involved a lot of research that doesn't necessarily, rear its head in the story itself, but I kind of just wanted to have this really comprehensive idea of what my magic system was, just to kind of lay the groundwork for the whole series. Yeah.
So it involves them binding to like certain elements, right?
Yeah. So how it works is, another thing as well is that I didn't want to write a magic system that was like some people are just born with magic. I wanted it to be like, I call it like a merit-based magic system where you have to earn the ability to use magic. And so these people will go through these kind of these horrific trials where they bind with individual elements. They'll ingest kind of like Mistborn. They'll ingest an element, but it's mixed with this fictional element. And so the whatever element they want to bind with that they ingest will end up binding to the elements that element that's in their body. And so if they survive the trial or the ritual, they will then wake up and be able to, manipulate anything that contains that element. But what they are controlling has to primarily be made of that element. And so if you have this giant boulder and you're bound to iron, and that boulder only has like 1% iron, then there's nothing you can do with that boulder. But if it was made of like, say, 95% iron, then you could. And so kind of following the logic there, the more elements you're bound to, the more stuff you're capable of controlling. And so like the main character, for instance, he's bound to 6 elements. Don't ask me what they are, because off the top of my head, I can't remember what they are. But like magma, for instance, is comprised of 90% or so of those elements, those 6 elements he's bound to, which allows him to manipulate it. But he's not bound to 10% of it, and so he can still hurt himself by using magma. He's special in that way, where you don't see anyone else that is bound to more than one element. It's just him. At least in this current story, most people who are elemental are just only bound to one. And so you've got like the metal workers that are bound to iron. You've got the cartographers that are bound to silicon. There are a few others. The thing is that I wrote this book a few years ago, and so I'm a little rusty trying to remember those specific details. But there are a number of other kind of groups or factions that are bound to specific elements.
Now, here's an important question for the listeners of this podcast, though, and for me in particular.
Yeah, what's up?
So we have this running thing on the podcast. I don't even know how to like explain it in a way that would justify it's how much it repeats in the podcast. But we're constantly talking about like making references to potassium being and things, and like I think it's because you one time he's a paramedic and he was like talking about like the different things they push to patients and things like that, and I was like, do you ever push potassium? And he was like, no, we don't push potassium, that can like that could like stop someone's heart or something like that. So I was like, do you ever pull potassium? I was just being completely facetious, and now I've just made it a thing where I'm just constantly referencing potassium and like things in potassium. And so I got to know, do people bind to potassium?
Yes, they do, actually.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, there are horticulturists. They bind to potassium, and it just allows them to cultivate like medicinal plants for the doctors and the doctors in the world, the physicians. So yeah, it is actually a thing.
They can't like manipulate potassium to like in someone's blood to like make their heart stop or something. Like slow down.
So they're only referenced in the story. You don't see an elemental that is specifically bound to potassium in Flames of Mira. I have to be really careful about, because the thing is that, as I mentioned earlier, something has to be like, if you want to control something, it has to primarily be comprised of the thing that you're bound to. And so it's a general rule in my book, for instance, that you can't control organic matter for like those specific reasons. I can't control the specific potassium in your body. It would be more like if your body was primarily potassium, I can control the whole body kind of thing.
I mean, my body is primarily potassium.
Oh yeah.
You're not dead.
Big strong bones and all that. You drink your milk.
Yeah. Maybe I need to do a fan fiction of your book, and I'll write a character. It's bound to potassium, and somehow it's like the best like character. He's figured out some way to like manipulate.
Just gonna break every rule in his world building.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like having the kind of magic system I have can make for some really like dorky situations of just being bound to things that you have no practical reason to be bound to.
Yeah, like
being bound to like hydrogen or something. I don't know.
Yeah, like the most obscure element or something.
Is there a limit to the elements can be bound to?
Yeah, so I'm trying to be careful in how I answer this question because
You want to be cut on the record?
Spoilers.
There are plot twists involved with the magic system. There was kind of this piece of advice that really resonated with me when it came to world building and magic systems and whatnot. Is there's something really satisfying about a magic system where, as the series goes on, instead of like having more things added to the magic system, you end up getting a deeper understanding of the magic system, and you end up, realizing applications with it that just didn't occur to you before. Mm-hmm. So the nice thing about my magic system is the possibilities are more or less endless. And so there are things that, especially in, you said you read part 1, I think in the end of part 2, maybe beginning of part 3, where you learn some things about, the true potential of what the magic system can do. So I guess this is a non-answer to your question.
No, it's good enough. I mean,
it's given me enough to work with for my fan fiction.
Oh my
gosh. Yeah, I will say that I don't know if you guys like Lovecraftian horror, but there are references to it in the book, and it kind of makes an appearance towards the end, and it kind of becomes more prominent in the sequel. But how the magic system kind of ties into the whole Lovecraftian horror aspect of the book is something that I've really enjoyed writing about. So
I am a big fan of Lovecraftian stuff, and actually my own little story that I've worked on about a year ago dealt with Lovecraftian type stuff. But I did notice references to me when I was reading it in the first through part 1, there was like one reference or two to a certain
the gray ones.
Yeah, I was like, that sounds very Lovecraftian.
Oh yeah, it is definitely Lovecraftian, and those are kind of, they will end up being like the series antagonists. You learn more about them, in the sequel, especially in the sequel. So that's kind of, I've had a lot of fun, writing that. So yeah, I like horror. I don't like, because like I've always been a fan of specific types of horror, like John Carpenter's The Thing from the 80s is my favorite horror movie. And it's kind of got a lot of like body horror in it. I don't really like slasher films that much. Just kind of that kind of style of, like Scream or Friday the 13th or those I've never really loved those, but I love, like the body horror kind of aspect of it. And so I wouldn't say that stuff is like a prominent thing in my books, but it kind of makes an appearance here or there because that's always been something that I've been interested in. And the magic system kind of lends itself to that because the human body, is made of elements. And so, like I kind of, alluded to, the type of potential that involves, the magic system is being able to manipulate the elements of the human body, let's just say. So I'll leave it at that.
How much research went into your magic system as far as learning about the elements?
I mean, a lot. Like, for instance, like trying to, because I had to be really particular because it's not just a chemistry based magic system, but there's also kind of, it uses the electromagnetic force as well, which you will see more of in the end of Flames of Mira. But just, a lot of research went into it, like trying to figure out like how, if I wanted someone to, manipulate an object that they're partially bound to, if I wanted, it to be by weight or by percentage wise, for instance, like there were a lot of like really random details that I wanted to kind of figure out, which I don't think I needed to figure out. I just kind of, my brain works that way where it would bother me if I was in a situation where I wrote something that didn't make sense and then someone came, confronted me down the road and was like, you said that it worked this way, but I found this thing here and it's kind of saying the opposite. What's up with that? And so I've kind of chilled out a bit lately, just like with this other project I'm working on, to not just get so hung up on the details. But I did get hung up on a lot of details when I was, writing Flames of Mira with the magic system and the world building. A lot of geology too, that I researched for the world building as well.
Yeah, that was another thing I was going to say is the world itself and the setting. What spawned that? It seems like a very interesting setting for a story.
The actually the sinkholes in southern Mexico. Do you know which ones I'm talking about? You see those pictures of like those really those giant sinkholes that are kind of like, it's kind of like an inverted bowl almost, and you like look down and you see like this massive like lake at the bottom, and you see the kind of the vegetation on the side, and it's just this really cool picture of these sinkholes. And so I remember seeing that and being like, wow, what if someone built a city in there? And so that kind of just started the whole process, where once I decided I wanted a world where there was a city in these giant sinkholes, I had to kind of like find a way to justify why they were built in sinkholes and not just on the surface. And so I kind of came up with this idea of the world, of the surface being frozen over. And then I thought to myself, well, or at that point, it was kind of just making the surface uninhabitable. And so I was trying to come up with a reason for why it would be. And so I came up with the idea of kind of these tidally locked systems. I don't know if when we were talking at Dragonsteel, if I mentioned this at all regarding like the world itself, but do you know what like a tidally locked system is? Like the moon is tidally locked with Earth.
Okay, yeah.
The moon is so much smaller than the Earth that the Earth's gravity creates drag on the moon to where it eventually stopped the rotation of the moon to where one side is always facing Earth and one side is always facing away. And so I kind of applied that to a planet and a star. In the world that the Flames of Mira is set in, it's tidally locked with the star it's orbiting. And so one side's always facing away, which causes the whole thing to be frozen over. Yeah. And so then it kind of just, went off from there, and I kind of created this whole like underground system. And I don't know if I mentioned this in Dragonsteel as well, but I've always, I don't like the idea of like these underground worlds being kind of bleak and dark and kind of horror-esque. I know I said earlier that I liked horror, but I didn't want to write like a horror book. I wanted to kind of have just elements of it. So I kind of conjured up this image of just like a really vibrant, underworld, kind of like, have you seen Journey to the Center of the Earth with, I think, Brendan Fraser or something like that?
Yeah.
I just remember, having these really cool images that came out of that movie, and just what would it be like if something like that existed. And so that's kind of how I went about, creating the world, was just having just kind of lots of color. I was also playing this video game called Terraria, which a big part of that is going underground, and it's really colorful and mysterious, and I kind of took inspiration from that as well. So that's kind of all the different places I think that I kind of drew from when creating the world.
Yeah, because the setting, at least as far as what we've seen of it, really caught. I mean, I always liked the setting of like an underground place, and I definitely like the fact that I do kind of get that sense that it's more vibrant. There's more things going on. It's not just a dark, dreary,
yeah,
going on. And that setting it definitely appealed to me when I started reading the book. So I was just curious as to what brought that on.
It was a lot of fun to write.
I have a question. If a video game maker came to you and said, "We want to make this book into a video game," what would you like hope it would be, or what do you think would be like the best type of video game for that your book would be suited for?
Like a genre?
Yeah,
I would say probably like, that's a good question. Because when I wrote the book, I was so focused on the characters, because the characters are very complex. They're very morally gray. And I was very focused on kind of just creating these kind of multifaceted characters. I think if it were a video game, it would probably kind of be one of those like story RPGs. If you ever played like Life is Strange or something like that, where the vast majority of the time you're just kind of, in these cutscenes and making these choices and whatnot. I kind of always envisioned it as something like that. With that being said, I know that the magic system is conducive to really cool like fight scenes and kind of fight mechanics. So maybe having kind of some sort of blend of those two things. I don't know. Maybe like, have you played like the new God of War games at all?
I have not. I actually really want to play those games, but I could see that being the good, because like those games do a really good job of having complex characters, but also having really good gameplay. It seems like.
Yeah, I really like the kind of the fantastical element of the new God of War games, but then it's also really focused on the story and the characters as well. So I feel like it'd be something like that if I wanted it to be a video game. I've kind of played around with the idea of like wanting to write for like a video game company because I feel like that would be a lot of fun. I just don't know if, because the thing is that when I first, like my first real job was a content writer for a software company, where I was just kind of writing articles for them. And I thought that because I was a writer, I would really enjoy that, but I ended up hating it a lot because it wasn't something that I like was passionate about writing about. And I feel like if I was in a situation where like say a video game was being produced and I was kind of writing something I didn't really care for, ideally I'd be in a situation where I would kind of make it something that I really enjoyed, but I just wouldn't want to. I'm also worried about kind of like bandwidth with my brain, like spending all day at your day job writing and then, in your off time writing books. I feel like that would be probably too much. That's the thing I like about my day job is it's at a tech company. And so being able to do that and then stimulate the complete opposite side of my brain when I'm writing has been really nice.
Mm. And the video game industry is not necessarily known for like leaving their workers with a lot of bandwidth, is it? Like, if you were right for that, who knows what the hours would be and all that, the demand.
Yeah, I've heard that too. So yeah, I like the current situation I'm in. It's nice. So I'll probably stick with it for the foreseeable future.
So you're working on a sequel to Flames of Mira, correct?
I already wrote it actually. I wrote it back in, I finished it back in like, well, I didn't finish it, but I finished a draft, like the fourth draft of it in May. And then I turned it into my editor. And now I'm just waiting to get notes back from him. It's kind of causing me a bit of stress because the book is supposed to come out next summer. And I still haven't, because how the process typically works is when you're under contract for a book, you submit the book, the editor will read it and provide notes, and then we'll give the notes back. And then you will then edit based off of those notes. And then you'll turn it back in, and then they'll do what's called copy edits. And so usually they'll have like a copy editor who will read through it and just check and see if there are any like plot inconsistencies or things that don't make sense. They're just looking for that. And so once they do that, then they'll send it back to you and you'll kind of make changes. They tend to be small scale changes most of the time, because most of like, if there's like any sort of like major plot hole or inconsistency, your editor would have picked up on it the first round. But then once you approve and make changes for the copy edits, then the publisher then has to get it proofread. And so then the proofreader will read it, and then you have to, as the writer, you have to approve all of the suggestions that they make. And so then they'll send it back to you, and then you have to do that. And then that's when it's finally ready to get printed. But the thing is that there's a whole nother step to it as well. Are you guys familiar with advanced reader copies, ARCs?
Slightly, because we had another author that he sent us.
That's right.
Advanced reader copies, but I don't know exactly what his side of that was.
It's a very I don't know how big of a deal they are, but they're kind of pretty necessary, at least at the moment, to the traditional publishing model, where the publisher will print out, a few hundred advanced copies, and then they will then send it to reviewers and to other authors with the hopes that that the reviewers will read it before the publishing date to kind of drum up hype and interest, and then also to authors so that the author can read it and then blurb it, and then that's why you'll see those kind of quotes on the backs of a book, from another author saying how much they loved it. So a publisher needs time to let other authors read the book and blurb it so that they can then put the blurb onto the actual first print run copy of the book. And so usually you need to put in the print run order like a few months before the book comes out.
So it's getting close.
It is getting close. Yeah. So it's definitely been stressful for me. So I don't know what's going to happen. I guess it really depends on how many edits I'll need to do for this first pass. But yeah, I imagine things are going to be pretty hectic, over the next several months. So we'll see.
Maybe it was perfect. Maybe you wrote the perfect.
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing is that because I've corresponded with my editor since then, and he's made references to his edits saying that it would require a somewhat light lift in terms of edits go. And so I'm hoping I won't have to do a ton with it. But if I have to request an extension, I won't hesitate to do that because I don't want to, have to rush something like this.
Right.
So yeah, to answer your question, I have written the sequel. It's been written for a while now. And so the thing that I'm working on at the moment is like a completely separate thing. It's kind of the thing that I've been, to not stay bored kind of thing.
Okay.
Do you want to, can you say anything about that project, about like genre?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's just like, it's not under contract or anything. Like I can say whatever I want. It's about a himbo who's forced to become one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And so it's a fantasy book.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's much more lighter in tone than Flames of Mira. It's meant to be, I wouldn't say it's a comedy, but it's meant to be like a kind of, have you read Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Eames? Have you heard of it?
I've heard of it.
I didn't think I've heard of it.
It's a really fun book. I really like it a lot. It kind of spoofs this whole kind of rock and roll culture where the premise of the book is these mercenaries would kill monsters back in their heyday. They were a band, which is kind of the rock and roll thing. And they're now old and fat and drunks now. And one of their daughters ends up needing to be rescued from this city that's under siege. And so they decide to get the band back together and, for one last tour, basically. And it's funny because like they even have like a manager, like a band manager, because the idea is that, if someone needs like a monster to be killed or something, they will, put the word out, and then the band manager will, book these tours or these jobs for these mercenaries. And so it's a really fun book. And so it's a fantasy book. And so you'll see these kind of like terminology kind of stuff that references rock and roll and whatnot. But it has really funny moments. It has really like sincere, like heavy moments as well. And I just love the balance that he struck between that. And so that's kind of what inspired this current book, was the idea of kind of like, the whole concept of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse is kind of this kind of like dark, end of the world kind of thing. But when you kind of have it as being this himbo who's kind of this famous Templar who has like these hordes of fans that follow him around, and he have kind of what's kind of like these paparazzi that follow him around too, and him kind of hiding the secret of his, that he was actually at the start of the novel, he was killed on this routine mission and then brought back to life as a lich. And so he's trying to hide this secret from all of these people while his body is slowly decaying. And so he has to find a way to kind of stop the decay and whatnot, and kind of all of these kind of antics that go on. And so I've been enjoying writing that a lot. And so
sounds like a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun. Yeah. And so I've written about half of it now, and I want to send it to Joshua, my agent, in the next probably few weeks or so. I'm just kind of waiting for some feedback from one of my beta readers. So it's been great. Yeah. So I'll probably have to kind of set that aside once I get edits from my sequel. And so it's kind of, yeah.
It definitely sounds like a good balance of like a different, like not your, not your standard like vanilla fantasy story, but at the same time, it sounds like something that audiences would really have fun with and enjoy.
Yeah, that kind of goes back to my earlier point about trying to find that balance of like familiar and new. Whereas a writer, I'm trying not to get too hung up on like writing something that is completely like different upon risk of like writing something that isn't relatable to writers or to readers. I'm sorry. And so this is kind of like my chill out book where I'm just kind of writing something that's fun, where it has a premise that is unique, but as far as a lot of the stuff that you see, it's kind of like fun fantasy kind of thing. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun writing.
Awesome. Thanks for telling us about that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Like a lot of fun. Well, I don't know if I have anything else.
Anything else
any questions for us?
No, I mean it was a a pleasure talking to you guys. I had a lot of fun just kind of hanging out this past hour and a half or so. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for saying you'd be willing to come on. That was really cool, and it was great meeting you at Dragonsteel. That was actually one of my highlights of Dragonsteel was just some of those brief moments of just connecting with some people in the industry that we both love. The sci-fi and fantasy. He was talking to Nick Martell a little bit, and
great, yeah, that's great. If you guys are there next year, I'll probably be there too because it's only like a 40-minute drive for me. So
why not?
Yeah, I'll see you guys there.
Hopefully, I don't know.
I don't know
further for us. So.
I don't know if I'll make
it's a bit more of a commitment for you guys, I'm sure.
I might try to make it for Stormlight 5 the year after.
Yeah.
But hopefully we'll see you again and wish you the best for sure. And
thank you. I appreciate it.
So
I'll be reading your books for sure. I started your book a couple of days ago. I'm finished part 1, so I'm enjoying it. So
cool. That's great to hear.
The world and the magic system has definitely intrigued me enough.
Oh, cool. Awesome. I'm happy to hear it.
Yep. So, thanks for coming on, Clay. We like to say at the end of the podcast, we say that this has been the Bridge of Two podcast, a far, far away bridge.
Except it's been 3 this time.
Except it's been 3 of us.